Good Shabbat, everybody. Welcome to this sacrament of Shabbat. Today we continue our discussion of the book of Isaiah. This is part 17 of a series. There are three parts to Isaiah, although in most Bibles it's thought by most that the book of Isaiah is just one book. It's actually three parts. There's the first part of the book of Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah, or second and third Isaiah. And it's well known by biblical scholars that Isaiah wasn't written by the historical prophet Isaiah, at least not the whole thing. It's generally attributed that the first 39 chapters, which we're well into now, are the writings of the historical Isaiah. And that Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah, which we'll get to soon enough, were later developments of the school of Isaiah. In other words, it was likely written by the disciples of Isaiah, the followers of Isaiah that taught in his spirit, were inspired by his prophecies and his teachings, and they developed those ideas into the future. And those were appended to the first 39 chapters of the book of Isaiah. But currently we're only in chapter 21, so we have a little bit longer to go here. And we're in the section where Isaiah is making prophecies of the fall of various countries. And in the time of Isaiah, it's so important to understand that that area of the world was chaos. There was constant wars, and Israel, both the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, were usually caught in the shuffle of empires and tribes taking over each other, taking over resources, taking over land, etc. And other things like knowledge, science being developed at that time, religious ideas being developed at that time. For example, much of what we understand as Genesis in the first book of the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Testament, most of that was gleaned from the Jewish masters' interaction with the Babylonian priesthood. So there's a lot of mixing of ideas here. So religiously speaking, a lot of ideas were coming together during this era that Isaiah prophesied. Isaiah basically prophesied that Israel would fall to the Babylonian Empire. He prophesied that the Babylonian Empire would be coming into Israel, that it would destroy Jerusalem and the first temple, and that it would put the Jewish people into exile out of their land. And that did happen. And it's terrible to think about that people died, that cities were destroyed, that sacred writings and libraries and wisdom was lost. Life was lost. It's tragic to even think about. But what is interesting about this time period and all the strife and the war that went on was that different cultures mixed. And the wise people of each culture, the wise people of Israel, the wise people of Babylonia, the wise people of Media or Middle Persia, the Persian Empire, great minds got together and they were able to compare, this is what we think about the universe and about God. What do you think about God, the universe, how he came into being, the meaning of life? They shared all these ideas. So that was what was good about all this strife and turmoil and cultures being put into a rock tumbler and tossed about, was that the wise people of different spiritual traditions did mingle together and exchange ideas. And biblical scholarship understands that the book of Genesis was widely developed from Jewish sages mixing with the Babylonian priesthood. In fact, when you read the book of Genesis against Babylonian scriptures, it's quite clear that the earlier Babylonian scriptures were plagiarized in the book of Genesis. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm saying that wise minds were able to see value in other spiritual traditions. And we'd be wise to continue such things in today's world, hopefully minus the war and destruction. But anyhow, Isaiah was considered to be a political prophet because he did predict the destruction, the fall of various kingdoms and empires, mostly that afflicted or had bad influence on Israel. So obviously, I don't want to paint Isaiah or the Hebrew Testament in a bad light. That's not what this is about. But just put yourself in the shoes of the Jewish people at that time. War was everywhere. They're being displaced. Their sacred, holy temple was brought to the ground. Their home was destroyed. They were made to leave their family, their children, their way of life, their religion. They are pushed out of their homes. Obviously, this happened several times in the Hebrew Testament chronicles, or as it's chronicled in the Hebrew Testament. And just imagine how the Jewish people longed for an end to this horror, this displacement. Sometimes they're put into slavery, sometimes into exile. It's just a horrible history to have to recall. But yet the Jewish people kept on rising up and trying again, reinventing themselves throughout the generations. So of course, Isaiah being in the middle of this very tumultuous history, he and both the Jewish people of his time wanted an end to this terror, to this horror. And so he predicted, as a channel of God, as a prophet of God, the fall of various kingdoms that were not supportive of Israel. So let's begin with Isaiah 21, verses 1 through 2. Here Isaiah prophesies the fall of Babylon, of Babylonia, as God's will. Of course, as you can see on the map, there is the Empire of Babylonia, which included Israel, both the north and southern kingdoms of Israel. It was ruled by Babylonia. Whenever the Babylonian Empire came in, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the first temple of Solomon, and then they exiled everybody from Jerusalem throughout Babylonia. So here Isaiah is predicting the fall of Babylon, which would be your capital city, which was right on the Euphrates River. So here's the Euphrates. If I'm tracing the arrow down here, Euphrates River comes straight down and passes right by Babylon, which would be the capital city of Babylonia. So Isaiah says in 21, 1 through 2, the oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea. As whirlwinds in the Negeb sweep on, it comes from the desert, from a terrible land. A stern vision is told to me. The betrayer betrays, and the destroyer destroys. Go up, O Elam, lay siege, O Media. All the sighing she caused, I bring to an end. So this is God purportedly speaking through Isaiah to Isaiah's Jewish listeners, the people of Israel, his hearers. So the Jewish people, Isaiah is predicting, is prophesying that the Jewish people are about to be put in exile by the Babylonian Empire. This was covered in prior chapters. But Isaiah here in chapter 21, he comforts the Jewish people that ultimately Babylon itself will fall to the Persians, who would ultimately allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, go back to their homeland to live there, and rebuild the second temple. So Isaiah is saying, despite prior prophecies that I predict through the Spirit of God, I predict that Israel will fall to the Babylonian Empire. Have faith, because the Babylonian Empire itself, God himself will bring to an end. And God speaks of the empires that do this. O Elam, O Media. These are references to the Persian Empire or Media. different forces that come together with the Persian Empire that end the Babylonian Empire. So the betrayer betrays. One can imagine that that's Cyrus the Great, who betrayed his own, I believe it was his uncle, don't quote me, but he overthrew the prior ruler of the Persian Empire. So the betrayer betrays, King Cyrus betrays his predecessor, takes over the land of Media, or the Persian Empire as it was known, and the destroyer destroys. Cyrus the Great destroyed the Babylonian Empire and took over that whole territory. And Cyrus the Great was seen even as a Messiah. He was called Messiah, referred to as Messiah in earlier prophecies of Isaiah, because Cyrus would advocate, in a sense, for the Jewish people, giving the Jews that were in exile throughout Persian Empire, the former Babylonian Empire, he allowed them the choice to stay where they were or go back to their homeland, go back to Jerusalem, and they were allowed to rebuild their own city with certain rules in place, etc. So the oracle of the wilderness of the sea, the wilderness in many different variations of the Bible, different translations of the Bible. Wilderness is also sometimes translated as desert, the desert by the sea. And it's very interesting. We get into lots of topics. As the whirlwinds in the Negev, in the south, sweep on, it comes from the desert, from a terrible land. A stern vision is told to me. The betrayer betrays and the destroyer destroys. So there's a great desert all around. I mean, this whole area of the world is a desert. It's dry. It's the Middle East. But from the south of Babylonian blows certain winds. And this was kind of like an omen of negativity, of violence being stirred up from a terrible land. So, in other words, surrounding areas that weren't so friendly to Israel. We can get into a few details here. Isaiah 21, 1-2, commentary. Wilderness is often interpreted as a desert. The desert plain between Babylon and Persia is specifically what Isaiah is referring to. So that's kind of easy to picture here. Here's the Persian Empire up here, and here's the Babylonian Empire. Babylon's a very developed city, but of course there's a lot of undeveloped desert land in between. So he's saying that there's going to be some kind of war between these areas, between Babylonia and Media down this area, and that it seems that it will culminate in Babylon by the sea. And the sea, in many different ancient sources, including the Hebrew Testament, is actually the Euphrates rivers. Many great rivers were often referred to as seas in ancient times. The Nile River in Egypt was often referred to as a sea in various biblical references and ancient historical references. So the wilderness, again, the desert plain between Babylon and Persia is where a great war would begin, because the Persian Empire would try and cross that desert to enter into Babylon, to invade it, to take it over. And the wilderness of the sea, Euphrates. So around the area of the Euphrates was where this great war would take place. Semiramis raised great dams against it, the Euphrates. Cyrus removed these dikes and so converted the whole country again into a vast desert marsh. So the Euphrates, when it would overflow, would create like a marshland, a very marshy, watery lowland of sort. And that's also why it could be considered a sea, because it kind of extended outward from the banks of the river itself. The betrayer betrays and the destroyer destroys. This refers both to Babylon and Persia respectively. That's one way of looking at it. And also, we already talked about the betrayer betraying could also mean Cyrus the Great betraying his predecessor to take over the Persian Empire before Cyrus would become the destroyer of the Babylonian Empire. The fall of Babylon was the decisive event that marked the total defeat of the Neo-Babylonian Empire to the Achaemenid Persian Empire in 539 BCE. Nabonidus, the final Babylonian king and son of the Assyrian priestess Adad-Gupi, ascended to the throne in 556 BCE after overthrowing his predecessor, Labashi-Marduk. For long periods, he would entrust rule to his son Belshazzar, who was a capable soldier but a poor politician. As a result, he was somewhat unpopular with many of his subjects, particularly the priesthood and the military class. To the east, the Persians had been growing in strength under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, who would soon lead a military expedition into Babylonian territory. In October 539 BCE, after the Battle of Opis, the Persian army made entry into the capital city of Babylon. With the success of Cyrus's campaign, Babylonia was incorporated into the Persian realm. As recorded in the Cyrus Cylinder, Cyrus vowed to respect the Babylonian people and also allowed incarcerated peoples to return to their homelands, most notably including the Babylonians captives from Judah. Consequently, he was viewed as the legitimate successor of the ancient Babylonian kings, and unlike Nabonidus, rose to become a popular figure in Babylon itself. So Cyrus became a well-known imperialist. He invaded Babylon, took it over, and he was good. He respected the Babylonian people that he took over. He expanded his empire, and he did it not by oppression, but by supporting the peoples to some degree. And notably, the Jewish people, as we've said in prior prophecies and prior discussions of the book of Isaiah, we brought up Cyrus back then. And they actually referred to Cyrus as a Messiah, as an anointed one of God, because Cyrus the Great, though he wasn't a Jew, he did set the Jewish people free from their exile, the Babylonian exile. And that's really what Isaiah is prophesying here. He's saying, although we will be taken out of our land, we will be exiled by the Babylonians, our sacred city of Jerusalem will be destroyed, our temple will be brought to the ground. Despite that, God says, I will bring an end to the Babylonian Empire. Retribution, divine comeuppance, right? So it does seem, whereas many of Isaiah's prophecies that we've spoken about in the past historically did not come to pass, this one did. This one did. Isaiah 21, 16 through 17, for thus the Lord said to me, Isaiah, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end, and the remaining bows of Kedar's warriors will be few. For the Lord, the God of Israel, has spoken. Here we see Cyrus the Great entering Babylonia with his empire, the so-called Messiah of the Jews. So what is the glory of Kedar? It's so important as people that follow Christian teachings or the teachings of Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. It's important to understand what was contained in the Hebrew Testament. And Isaiah really did shape Jesus's teachings to a great deal. Of all the prophets, Jesus was probably most influenced by Isaiah and also by Enoch because of the Son of Man Messiah. Later on in the book of Isaiah, we start to see Isaiah preaching the Baranash, the Son of Mankind collective Messiah. So Jesus's perception of Messiah stemmed in the book of Daniel, the book of Isaiah, and the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is even alluded to in the letter of Jude, where a disciple of Jesus quotes Enoch, because Enoch was a sacred scripture to the disciples of Jesus. But anyhow, my point is that oftentimes when modern Christians both Orthodox Christians and more esoteric Christians, Gnostic Christians, etc., however we identify as Christians or followers of Jesus's teachings, we do have to understand that Jesus was a Jew, and we should understand what the Hebrew Testament is saying. So all the glory of Kedar will come to an end, and the remaining bows of Kedar's warriors will be few, for the Lord has spoken. Well, what is Kedar? What is that word? It's not terminology we're used to. And it's not something that was taught to me in Sunday school when I was a kid. So I'm assuming that's true for many of us. So all the glory of Kedar will come to an end. Kedar is used, as in Psalm 120, verse 5, Song of Solomon 1:5, generically for the nomadic tribes of Arabia, including Dedan. So essentially, in addition to the Persian Empire coming in and taking over Babylonia, destroying the empire that took away the Jewish people's freedom, took them out of their homeland, out of their way of life, in addition, such a large empire would naturally douse any aspirations of nomadic tribes throughout Arabia. Because such a great power had come in, since Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire swept through Babylonian Empire and took it over, of course, smaller little tribes throughout Arabia, throughout the whole area down here, naturally, they would think twice about trying to cause trouble. So this prophecy of Isaiah seems to have come true, which is very fascinating because some of his other ones did not come true. So one would say, well, then how can we trust any of the prophecies of Isaiah? If many of them didn't come true, yet this one did seem to come true, then what's up with that? If God was speaking through Isaiah, shouldn't it all have come true? Oh, well, Isaiah must have been a fake. The Bible must be a fake. God must be a fake. None of that is true. In any particular moment in history, due to mass consciousness and independent consciousnesses within humanity, we're each doing things, good, bad, and neutral thoughts, words, and actions. And all of this conglomeration of negative, positive, and neutral vibrations are in movement at a particular moment in time. And at any particular moment, somebody who can prophesy the future. But the thing is that until that moment of time comes, for example, this particular prophecy, Isaiah said, would take a whole year to develop and come to fruition. Over a course of time, mass consciousness may change. So to use the language of India, there's karma. Karma means what you do is what you get. Literally, that's how you can interpret it. So in Sanskrit, karma means action. By doing a certain kind of action, we get a certain kind of result. So in the mass consciousness of Israel, at any given time, the total behavior of thought, word, and deed of the Israeli people at that time in history created certain causes and conditions for good or bad things to happen. And Isaiah would prophesy those things. And sometimes, like this prophecy, it would come true. At other times, it would fall short. And that's because karma is always shifting. The language or the Hebrew word that's equivalent to the idea of karma is hub. And hub means debt. It means a debt that needs to be paid. So if a population is mostly negative in its behavior, it will get a negative action back. If it's mostly positive, then a positive thing will happen. But the thing is that mass consciousness of a population, whether it's that of the United States or of China or of Russia or of Egypt, any country of the world, that mass consciousness changes every day. and it can trend more positive or more negative. And depending on whether that mass consciousness at the time of Isaiah, whether it trended negative or positive, could change Isaiah's prophecies. So any kind of prophecy or mystical channeling of any type that you might think of, there are certain actions in the past that project a certain result in the future. But we can always change negative results of the future by doing more positive things now in thought, word, and deed. That's the hope. The more we seek God, the more that we seek to evolve humanity by helping the poor, the elderly, all these things, doing righteous actions, then we could avoid negative outcomes, not only for our personal countries that we live in, but for the whole world. So again, when a prophet prophesies at any given point of time, the mass karma of a population, all their past thoughts, words, and deeds create a certain future, a certain result, a certain fruit. But that people, when they're warned by a prophet that we are in dark times, we need to do good actions, we need to seek God, we need to meditate, we need to pray. If the people listen to that prophet, the whole future can change. And it's this idea of fluctuating karma, mass consciousness trending positive, negative, or couldn't care less, neutral. This shapes the future. Our actions, our prayers, our meditations, our worship can change the future of this entire planet. It certainly can change us on an individual level. The more people in our geographic area that are positive can change that geographic area. And when more geographic areas work together, the people populations within those areas trending positive, we could change the world. We could make this earth a heaven realm. And that should be our goal as modern day followers of Jesus. Because that's really what Isaiah was hoping for. I know there have been moments throughout the older classes where I judged Isaiah, and I stand by what I've said in these classes. But like I said, we have to understand the time in which they lived. They were hoping for an end to the terror, the oppression of their people. And they hoped that oppressive kingdoms would fall, that oppressive rulers would fall. And likewise in our time, there are a lot of autocrats and dictators around this planet. Even in very democratic countries, there are certain forces of dictatorial desire and autocratic desire cropping up. We have to be careful. Otherwise, we could be what happened back in the time of Isaiah can happen today. If we, the people, don't speak up. We, the people, being the peoples of each country all around the world. It's something to think about. Then we might be praying for the fall of an autocratic leader or a country that's coming in. I mean, it's just horrible what humanity has done, past and present. May we all pray and act in a way to bring in a happy and peaceful future for this humanity and this planet. Second cup of blessing. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, may I be an instrument of your peace and your joy on this planet. May I fill myself up with you to overflowing, that my joy, my peace, my calmness fills my whole being and spills out to touch and bless every other human in creation. May it be so. Amen. 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 Good Shabbat, everybody. I'll see you next week with chapter 22 and possibly a few other chapters too. We're going to try and condense this last section of political prophecies so that we can move on to Isaiah and start learning the real fruit of Isaiah's inspiration, how that helped to shape the teachings of Jesus and modern Christian thought in all of its versions and beauty. I'll see you next Friday. Good Shabbat.